Hello, everybody.
Hey there.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm new to Zoom. So first of all, I apologize for any mishaps I have because my IT guy is playing some games with a fellow friend, I guess. So um, I'm hoping that this can be more of a conversation than me just talking at everybody. So if you want to unmute yourself when you want to talk, that's totally cool. And I hope that I have everybody unmuted and then you can just kind of control that the way you want to. So we all can hear me. Good, okay. Okay, so I'll let some people kind of join in here a little bit. If there's any problems, do let me know. I might have to get Elliot on the job, but a little bit about me. I see some new faces and some faces that I do know. But I am Michelle and I've been homeschooling for a little over 7 years. And as a lot of you probably know, we radically accelerated Elliot due to his demand and wish. But we did go through all the normal homeschooling steps as everybody else did or does, but homeschooling looks different for everybody else. I'm understanding too that a lot of people are worried about distance learning and how it was not probably working for them this last spring semester and looking for some changes. So I'm going to go through some stuff. So I took some notes and I have some information that I'll send you all in a link to that has to do with some forms and that kind of stuff that you would need to submit to the state. But if you have questions, just chime in and let me know and I'll stop. So we're good. Everybody can still hear me?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So a few things to think about is the different types of schooling. And so you have the different kinds of schooling that you have are in-person school, which is everybody is used to, and then everybody is switching to distance learning or a hybrid learning. So what we're doing instead is seeing people wanting to do pods, which are going to be distance learning with maybe having some teachers or other parents help with the distance learning. It's not true homeschooling. The state and the school district is still responsible for your child's learning, and they're accountable for the learning rather than the parent being accountable. So if you want to do true homeschooling, everything is in your court then. So then you're going to be responsible for teaching the subjects that the state wants you to teach. And recording and letting the state know that you're going to be homeschooling. So there's also online schooling that it does not have to do with your district, but it still can be public or private schooling. And that school system would be still responsible for your students. So say like the K-12 or Connections Academy, you can enroll in that. It's online schooling, but they might have a little bit more experience in online schooling than maybe your school district does. So that's another option, but it's still like an online schooling. It's not true homeschooling. If you want to homeschool in the state of Minnesota, it's a pretty easy state to homeschool in. The requirements are very little compared to a lot of other states. So basically you need to declare your student as a homeschooler, and you need to make that declaration either by October 1st or within 15 days of withdrawal. So you could start the school year out and see how distance learning is going for your student. If it's not going well, you can withdraw the student and just give notice to your school district. A couple things that are different about that this year is that with COVID, normally there might be 1 or 2, maybe half a dozen homeschoolers in your district. But if we're seeing like a bunch of people mass exodus to homeschooling, your district loses those funds. So if you decide you need to go back into a public school, typically that would be no problem. If 1 or 2 people go back into public school from homeschooling, the school can kind of juggle their funds a little bit. But once you've left for the school year and they've gotten their allotment of funds for the students that are enrolled, they'll lose the funds for whatever homeschoolers come back. So normally I say, you don't have anything to lose. You can go back into school if this isn't working for you. But that's just something to keep in mind too. I don't suspect that there's going to be a lot of people that are homeschooling that are going to rush back into public school, especially during distance learning, but it's something to think about. With homeschooling, so you're going to submit the paperwork, and I have a link that I'll send you that has the paperwork. You can do any form that you want. It just has to have some information on it that the state requires. The state has a form, and so does the Minnesota Homeschoolers Alliances. They have a form too that is a little bit less information that you have to provide. In the state of Minnesota, you have to do one academic test a year, achievement testing, but you do not give those results to the state. So as long as your student has scored at least 30% better in an age grade test, so if you have a third grader, they would take like a third grade test. As long as they get 30% or more on that test, there's nothing else you have to do. You don't submit the test results to anybody. You can keep those to yourself. The only way that the state would come after you is if Child Protective Services, there was somebody maybe reported you if they had a concern. Very rare. If that happens, you want to make sure that you have in your file the receipt of the test that you took. If you had a tester give it, or if you gave a test that you mailed away for results or that kind of thing, make sure that you have all that information with you. But again, that's something that's not normally done. Minnesota also requires you to do record keeping. So it's very minimal too. They want you to do some schedule. They want to make sure that you are teaching all the subjects that they're asking you to teach. The one thing about Minnesota is that yes, there's a set of standards for public school and what the public school has to teach, but you don't have those same restrictions when you're homeschooling. So they can go as fast or slow as you want. You can dive deep into other subjects. You don't have to use a set curriculum. They're not going to review your curriculum. And it's really easy actually. So what I do is I make a portfolio. If there's any tests that I gave, I'll keep that kind of stuff. I keep work samples. And then this is also in the PDF that I'll send you, but this is sort of an example, and I don't know if you can see that because I can't see myself, but basically it's just a weekly record of what you did. So like if you went on a field trip somewhere, you can use that for homeschooling. If you went to the library and you researched things, if you went to the store and you made it a trip out of nutrition and what it's like to budget your family budget for your shopping trip, all that kind of stuff can be considered part of homeschooling. And any kind of outdoor activities or sports that they're in, it can all be considered FIAD too. So it's the little things like that that add up to your full curriculum. Some people will have a boxed curriculum. Knowing my background, you know that I come from more of a gifted background. So a lot of times the gifted community, a boxed curriculum is not going to work for them. And a boxed curriculum is basically you buy a set box of curriculum that has all your subjects in it for a certain grade level. And that can work beautifully for some people. And then a lot of times it doesn't work. So you're also going to want to evaluate what kind of learner your student is. Are they a visual learner or audio learner? Are they a mastery learner? Do they need to have things repeated? Or do they master something and then you can move on for it? So knowing what kind of student that your student is will also help you decide what kind of curriculum to choose from.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm going too fast or if I'm going over stuff that people already know for Minnesota. And I know we're a little bit more Minnesota specific, but there's all sorts of stuff that you can pick online. And then you can also not have a curriculum and you can do child-led learning or unschooling. And that works really well for a lot of students too. So if they're really into a subject at one point in their life, They want to dive deep, and you want to make sure that they're being stimulated and interested in school still. You might take that subject that they're learning about, and what we did with Elliot is just let him go all in. So if it were space or the periodic table, you can still make it all subjects by learning about the periodic table. You can learn about the history of the periodic table, the elements, what the elements do, what they're used for. You could watch movies about it, write reports about it, do math about it. So everything, if they're doing a child-led learning on a specific subject, you can wrap that into a curriculum based on just that. So Minnesota is not going to say, I need to see your curriculum. They're not going to say, you need to show me printouts of all the worksheets and that kind of stuff. So it gets to be a little bit more loosey-goosey. We did a lot of what I call life schooling and road schooling and car schooling. So we would make everything that we did kind of a learning experience. Especially when he was really little, he would read the shopping list when we went to the grocery store. We can learn fractions and math if we're talking about recipes that we're using, or how to read nutrition labels and that kind of stuff. All that kind of stuff counts, especially when they're really little. When they get a little bit older, then you're gonna maybe want to do more of a worksheet or workbook curriculum or online classes. And especially if they're getting at the junior high and high school level, there's lots of options online for classes, and you can piecemeal. So you can take a few classes here and there from different places. Or you can do a complete online schooling, which we kind of talked about earlier. So you can also, no matter where your student is, allow them to excel at their pace. So if they're a second grader and they're doing second grade math work, they can still do they can move into second grade or third grade language arts. So they could move up a grade in a certain subject, and that's going to be okay with the state. That doesn't matter to the state. So you can accelerate your student, but that's where box curriculum won't work for you, because if you buy a box curriculum, then you have all second grade stuff. I will say that if you do get a curriculum and it's not working, if you haven't written it, curriculum has a really high resale value. So you should be able to still sell it to somebody. Let's see. One big question that people have is about homeschooling. What's the time commitment every day for homeschooling? I think people think that homeschooling is going to take 6 to 7 hours a day, just like you do at school. And there's a lot of, I don't want to say wasted time, but there's a lot of other things going on at school that's not actually learning. So what happens is everything sort of gets condensed a little bit more when you're homeschooling. And when you're at a kindergarten level, you're probably not going to homeschool more than a half an hour to an hour a day. And that's working on your core subjects like math and science and reading and language arts. As they get older, you might add another half an hour onto that. So a second grader might be working maybe 2 hours a day. A third grader, maybe 2 to 3 hours a day. A high schooler probably is not going to work more than 3 to 4 hours a day on homeschooling, depending on what they're doing. So it's really not that much of a time commitment. And that's kind of like, I know that Erin, you were wondering about working while homeschooling, and I had to do a lot of that. I do have a business that I ran. So I had to be creative about how I was going to teach Elliot and still homeschool, especially when they're really little. You need a little bit more hands-on. You can't just have them work in a curriculum without maybe showing them some things. So when you are trying to work while homeschooling, you might try to do a few things. You might try to do some independent work with the student, and if that's 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes, whatever that student is able to give you, you can get to know how much they're going to be able to work independently. And then you might have 10 minutes on when you're giving them direction on something else, and then give them another 10, 15 minutes independently. And you can include things like videos on YouTube or Netflix that are educational. You can include playtime, even for like phy-ed kind of stuff, if they're outside doing some exercise kind of stuff or playing. And you can include reading time. And then you can also it doesn't have to be that you're doing schooling from 9 to noon every day. If you're doing something else, you can have schooling from 6 to 8 at night, if that works better for your working time. But of course you would need, especially for the littles, have somebody watch over them. But also delegating some of the responsibility works well too, if that works in your family. If a grandparent can come over and help for a little bit during the day, even if it's via Skype, so that they're, or Zoom, if they're talking to your student during that time, maybe they can give you a half an hour a day. If you have a neighbor or a friend, or you're like my husband was able to do some homeschooling for us too. He is into music and Swedish and that kind of language stuff. So I would delegate some responsibility to my husband too. So between people helping in your tribe and growing that independence with the student and having flexible hours, and also having a flexible curriculum, you can really tailor the day how you need it to work into your working schedule. So what I found when people were distance homeschooling from this, or distance schooling, I should say, from this last spring semester, is everybody's like, I still have to work. I don't know what to do. I'm running around with my head cut off like a chicken because I have to manage my kids, but I can't manage my work. So that's where I would kind of schedule your meetings if you can during certain times. And then you know that, okay, then I'm going to have 15 minutes on with my kid, and then they're going to have 15 minutes of independent time, and then they're going to have 15 minutes or 20 minutes on Zoom with grandpa, and then maybe somebody else for something else. So you kind of have to pre-plan your days to be a little bit more creative to work. But and sometimes you might have to work nights or work weekends to kind of make up for what you might have missed during the day. For planning the week, what I usually did is on Sunday nights would plan the next week. Okay, I want to get these items done. So here's my days: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I would record what I hope to get done that day and that week. And then on Sundays, I would be like, okay, we didn't do that, so we're going to kind of try to do that again this week. Oh, we already did that, or he went really far on that, so we don't have to do that subject again this week. So you get to have so much flexibility really on what you're going to do. So I also want to say that the scariest part of homeschooling is actually making the leap to do the homeschooling. Once you make that decision, which is so full of anxiety, especially right now, and there's so many unknowns with everything else, once you make that decision, like the sense of peace comes over you. So it gets to be a little bit easier. Then you can stop focusing on the what ifs and just like, okay, we made the decision and we're going to move on. So I know it's a really stressful decision, and it's never a permanent decision. Even with COVID and you worrying about your district losing money, there's still options. You can put them back into school. I don't want you to say that you can't put them back into school. You can, or you can find a different kind of school or online schooling that might have a lot more structure. The higher grades I was talking about, junior high and high school, there's a lot of online college classes and high school level classes that you can take for free, and start building that. If they start taking them even as a junior high student, start putting it on a transcript and counting that towards their high school transcripts. In Minnesota, we can do that. And then those will start racking up, and then you'll be able to start graduating them. And that I can talk about more next week when we talk about radically accelerating, which is what Elliot did. So he just consumed everything that we gave him. And I'll tell you, I did start off buying a box curriculum because I had no idea. I didn't realize that he was going to work so fast or so far ahead. And then I realized really quick, okay, well, he's in kindergarten, he's doing 4th grade math and 3rd grade social studies. And then all of a sudden it was like math went really far ahead, because that was his passion and he didn't want to do the other stuff, but we still made him do the other stuff. But so I kind of know where everybody's kind of starting from. So let's see, what else do I have to say? Somebody asked about when the parent becomes the teacher. And this is good So I have two ideas here. When Elliot was little, and he was doing homeschooling, and if he would get a little rowdy or didn't want to listen to me, I would pretend that I had a hat. And this is when he was real little, 4 or 5. It's like, okay, here's my parent hat. I'm going to take my parent hat off and I'm putting my teacher hat on. And that like gave him a visual, like, okay, we're going to set the mood for something else. This is my learning time with my new teacher, my mom. And he was able to kind of switch gears and not give me a hard time, and kind of got to work, and he was able to process that switch a little bit more. That said, you're also his parent, their parent, and part of homeschooling is that you can still grow that connection in a relationship and learn together. So it's not that you want to say, okay, I'm the teacher right now. You kind of want to do it in a way where you guys can work together and still bond over the homeschooling experience. So, but if they do need a little bit of differentiation to kind of switch gears, you can kind of sometimes do that. Sometimes people will have a homeschooling room, like, okay, so we're going to do our homeschooling here. Everybody's going to get in the mood to homeschool, and that's what gets done there. And I can tell you that it always ended up on my kitchen table, no matter what. So we had a nice room for homeschooling, and it just ended up at the kitchen table. Somebody also asked, we talked a little bit about transcripts for high school classes. I ended up using something called transcriptmaker.com, and it is, I think it's like $15 a month, but I would just go in there and buy 1 month to update it, and then it saves your information, and then at the end of the year I would buy 1 more month for $15 and update it again. In there, you can put all the high school level classes that they took. So if they're taking algebra and geometry, even in junior high, you can give them credit for that. And you can talk, it will give a grade point average. It calculates everything for you. And it has all their information, and it's an official transcript, so that when they graduate from high school, when you graduate them from high school, they'll be able to use that information and submit it to the colleges when they go to college. Now, Minnesota does require instruction in language arts, science, history, math, and Phi-Ed, but there's no learning standards for homeschoolers. Just as long as that they're working at their grade level, or 30% of that grade level, that is fine. As the parent, you decide when to graduate them in Minnesota. They don't have to take any sort of test that says that they're ready to graduate. They don't take a GED test. It's up to the parent to decide if they're ready to graduate. That said, you also have to look at, if they're going to college, you'll need to look at what colleges that they're interested in require for the incoming applicants. So like the U says, well, you need to have 2 years of foreign language. So you want to look at that kind of stuff to know, okay, if they're going to go to one of these schools, they're going to require foreign language. We need to make sure that we work on those kind of things. So rather than looking at the state and what they're going to require for graduation, which isn't really anything that will matter to you, it's going to more matter what the colleges are looking for. So just make sure that you're building that transcript as you go, and try to do it as you go, because I didn't realize he was making so many high school credits, and I had to go back to all my records and kind of piecemeal the transcript after a while. So it will kind of save you some trying to remember later. In the state of Minnesota, the one kind of requirement that Minnesota has that's a little bit more difficult to get around is that if you as the parent can homeschool your child, it doesn't matter if you don't have a college degree or even a high school diploma. As the parent, you can homeschool the child and fulfill the requirements of the state of Minnesota. However, if you're looking to delegate some of that homeschooling, the person that's going to be doing those classes either has to have a teacher's license or have a 4-year degree. So if you're looking to like doing some pod homeschooling, if you're going to have another person, homeschooling your child for 1 day a week, if you're kind of taking turns, you'll just need to make sure that you're within those requirements. I don't want to say anything like the state of Minnesota isn't going to audit you, but I would just, make sure that you have that on record, that that person did meet the requirements. And that goes for grandparents too, unless they have legal custody. The grandparents are supposed to have a 4-year degree too. There's also co-ops that you can join, and we have tons of different co-ops in Minnesota, and they can be either academic co-ops, or they can be playgroup co-ops or game co-ops. And what those are, and I know things are different for COVID right now, is that you would meet up with other homeschoolers. So you would go and take some classes, like in the high school and junior high level, there's something called Planet Homeschool in Minnesota. You go take classes, and those classes count towards your transcripts. So, and you're with other homeschool students. There's some that are just play groups that will meet up for park dates once a week. And there are sometimes they're just like Dungeon and Dragon groups or board game groups. There's a gifted co-op. So if you just Google co-ops, like homeschool co-ops in your state or your city, you'll get a lot of information. And also, if you also do the same thing with Facebook, search that in Facebook, and you'll get a lot of local groups as well. Minnesota does have something called, we have Minnesota Homeschool Adventures, I think it's called. And that is a website and a Facebook page that has lists of activities, theater, happenings, meetups. So you can kind of be put on their mailing list, and when your emailing list. And when something new comes up, you can be alerted to that, or you can go search all their activities there. So that's kind of a cool thing too, so you can meet other people. And one thing too I want to stress that I felt was really rewarding for our homeschool experience is using your network for what you need for your child. So I would crowdsource whatever I needed at the time, whether it's like Elliot was really into coding for a while, and I was able to crowdsource on my Facebook page, hey, does anybody know anybody that does anything for coding for a profession? And somebody said, yeah, I'm an administrator at this big company downtown that does coding, come on down. So Elliot spent a day with all these top coders and, got a tour, got to code some stuff. And it's all free because people are volunteering their time and mentoring the students, and it all counts for, field trips and they're learning stuff, and they're also learning social skills that way too. Which brings me to somebody was asking about trying to build their social lives and social activity. So one thing too with homeschooling is that when you're put in school, you're in with age-similar peers. And while that also has a benefit of learning to work with and grow with those peers, it's also not just about being able to work with people the same age. So I think people forget that any kind of socialization with any people of all ages is going to be rewarding for the student, and they're going to learn a lot from that. So a lot of times what I like to do is, if Elliot has a doctor's appointment, he presents himself to the check-in person. He tells the doctor what is wrong with him or why he's there, and I let him have that conversation. Of course, I'm right there too if I need to fill anything in, but he's learning those skills on how to deal with those kind of life things and still talk to somebody that might be older than him, and be able to be respectful and earn respect back. So that's a really good learning experience for them too. Does anybody have any questions so far? Everybody's quiet. I assume everybody can still hear me. The other things that you can do with homeschooling is join scouts and church groups and 4-H. Minnesota has a really active 4-H area in all the cities, so that's something to look into as well. Colleges usually have really fun field trips or events going on for kids and for people of all ages, like the U of M. When COVID's not in session, they have a astronomy thing on Friday nights where you can go look through their telescope and have a presentation. And they have a lot of cool stuff set up for kids too. So you can get on those kind of mailing lists if you kind of Google events at University of Minnesota, and you'll learn a lot about those things and follow their Facebook pages. So those kind of things are super cool and add to your homeschooling too. A lot of people are wondering too about PSEO and dual enrollment and how that works with homeschoolers. And so what our PSEO is a post-secondary education options program in the state of Minnesota, where high school kids can have 2 to 3 years of free college. In 10th grade, they can have, they can take classes. It's a limited number and kind of classes at trade schools. So they can get some of those classes under their belt at like Hennepin Tech and those kind of places. And then at 11th and 12th grade, they also can take classes at other institutions like the University of Minnesota. They do have to still apply, and for homeschoolers, you have to submit SAT scores. I don't know if they're going to put that on hold right now for the next year for COVID, as they have for regular students, but so you have to submit SAT scores and do an application, but you can also take classes at community colleges like Elliott and Normandale. And you can take as little as 1 class, or you can take a full ride of classes. A normal high schooler is only allowed to take as many classes as that they have free open during the day. So if a normal kid is taking 6 classes at the public school and they have 1 free hour, then they can only take 1 class at the college. However, homeschoolers, you can put all their classes in colleges, which what we ended up doing. So the thing with the state of Minnesota, we have a little bit less flexibility because you have to be, sorry, my dog is growling. You have to be registered as a junior or senior. So what we ended up doing is declaring Elliott as a junior in high school to be able to do those PSEO programs. And then it just works just fine. So there was not anybody that said, well, did he graduate from high school, or is he about to graduate from high school? And I knew from his transcripts that he had close to all the information that he needed for graduation. So it was an easy process. The school takes care of everything for you. You have to fill out a form for the school, and then they submit everything to the state. So that's a really great program that we have in Minnesota. If there's people from other states joining in, some states have better programs. I think it's Texas and California both have programs that their students can start taking college classes at 6th grade, so for free. So that's a really great opportunity for other people. Somebody was wondering what it's like to homeschool a gifted child with ADHD or someone who struggles to focus. I didn't have to encounter that too much. Elliott doesn't have any 2E diagnosed issues, which is twice exceptional, such as ADHD or anything like that. But what I do know is that he likes to fidget with something. And while I think, like, how do you pay attention to what you're learning while you're fidgeting? He's still able to do that. So give them allow them to fidget, allow them to take breaks. If they need to be hanging upside down when they're reading something, some kids are just like that and can focus a whole lot better than maybe an adult would be used to. And then sometimes like a exercise ball or a bouncy ball, those kind of things allow them to have that space to be able to focus on what they need to do with their hands. And if you find that your child only has 15 minutes and then they're kind of kaput and need a break, do that 15 minutes and then allow them to have 15 minutes of free time or Play-Doh time or building time or whatever they need to do to kind of switch gears with their brain and then come back to homeschooling. So it's not like you have to sit there for 2 to 3 hours and get everything done at one time. I know that like, that's what, as adults, that's kind of what we're used to and how we function and probably how we were brought up in school, but homeschooling gives you complete flexibility to manage your day however you need to. And another point is that what I learned too with Elliot is that I had this box curriculum and I had all the schedules and I wanted to go in really prepared to homeschooling. And then I learned quickly that my way of teaching him was not his way of learning. So I think that's important to remember. You might have a way of teaching, which is probably the way you were taught in school, and that's just what you think schooling is. And then he was not that way at all. He was a mastery learner where I was a spiral learner. I needed to be constantly reviewing everything that I was doing in order to remember. And he would learn something and move on, learn something and move on. And I couldn't keep up with him myself. And then I thought that I was going to sit there and kind of review things and come back to things, and it just wasn't that way. So that's part of getting to know your learner too. So if they're mastering something, move on. Don't keep drilling and grilling and drilling and making them do all sorts of timed worksheets and stuff, because that will just kind of kill their passion and their desire to learn. So just kind of keep moving. And if they're not into something one day, that's okay. You can do it another day or find a different way to teach it, or teach it a different style. But if it's gonna, everybody's breaking down into tears one day, that's the beauty of homeschooling, is that you're not having to be stressed out about something or reporting back to a school if you didn't get your homework done. Just take a break, take a breather, do something else. They might need a mental health day or a play day or something, and allow them to have that. Somebody says, because I just figured out how to read the chat stuff. Sorry. Did I encourage Elliot to do other subjects than he didn't want to? Yes, but I tried to do it in a way that he would enjoy it better. So we kind of talked about how if he was into a big subject, when he was really little, he was into space. So we did, all right, I'll give you all things space, history of space. We can do math with space. We can measure distance between planets. We can learn about all sorts of stuff, the history of discovery and all this kind of stuff. So if they're into a subject, try to go all out into that subject, because if they're all of a sudden like, okay, well now actually you have to read some Shakespeare, they might not be as into it, and you're just trying to hit like some language arts or something else with that kind of stuff. As they get older and mature more, and they might enjoy Shakespeare more, or they might enjoy the poetry parts a little bit more. When Elliot was put into college, and then he was taking all his gen eds, and he had to take communications, I thought, oh, this is going to be where he's like hung up, because he's not going to like this at all. And to my surprise, it ended up being one of his favorite classes. So it always kind of surprises me. And I think he just happened to be ready then. So you have the flexibility. If you don't want to work on something for a week or a month, you don't have to. You can come back to it. Are there any immunization forms that you need to submit to your state? Yes. So the state of Minnesota, when you enroll your kid in kindergarten and in 7th grade, I believe it is, you have to do forms. So you can get those on the Minnesota Department of Health website. It's the same form that you would submit when you enroll them in kindergarten and when they get updated again in 7th grade. So you do have to submit that to your district, and you can go ahead and do that when you enroll in homeschooling. But you don't have to do it before their 7th grade if you've already submitted it in kindergarten. How did I decide which curriculum to start with? Well, I didn't know any better, and I just bought a box curriculum when Elliot was between 4 and 5, because that's what he was always sort of a workbook guy. So he would go to Barnes and Noble, and I think he was going to pick out, some comic book or junior reader or something. He wanted workbooks from the workbook section in Barnes and Noble. So he always thrived on workbooks. So I got, at the time, I got something called New Horizons, and it was a non-secular homeschooling boxed curriculum. And then I ended up getting him one grade level And right away, that was like not working because he just flew in some areas, and some areas he didn't really want to do, like language arts wasn't his favorite, but he still did it. He didn't give me much resistance, but it just wasn't what he loved to do. So after that, I looked it up into more ways, different kind of curriculums. And there's some things called lap books, where basically you take a file folder and you do a subject with that. So you're learning, you're putting different resources in there, different activities and worksheets and books to read. And if you Google a little bit more about lap books, that's going to be a lot more hands-on homeschooling because you're putting it together. Although I think that there's some people now that you can kind of copy paste their lap book stuff. So you're kind of designing the lessons yourself too, rather than just having a workbook. The annual achievement testing requirement. What qualifies as an achievement test, and how do you know a class qualifies for a high school course? Are there state requirements? There's no state requirements. So you get to decide when you think your kid has fulfilled graduation, but I used the University of Minnesota and their requirements to determine when Elliot was ready to have his high school diploma. Achievement testing, the most popular achievement testing that that we use in Minnesota is something called the Peabody test. And that's a test that you can use up to 12th grade. It's a very easy, I don't want to say like easy content test, but it's an easy test to deliver and to do as the student. So I used a woman who tests here in Minnesota. Her name is Ann Matthews, and I can give you her information. And she comes to you, or you can do it on Skype too. And I think she charges $65, and it's a talking test. So she's going to ask you some questions and the student's going to reply. So they don't have to have writing skills at that point if they're younger. They don't have to have reading skills if they're younger. She's going to have a conversation with the child. And the test is built so that it gets harder as you go. And I can't remember if it's 3 or 5 questions or somewhere in between. Once they miss so many questions in a row, that's when they know at what level that student ended up being at. And I think what most parents find out is that their kids are a whole lot further along in the state standards for public school students than you think they are. It's kind of a trip getting those scores back because they're usually a lot higher than you think they're going to be. But there's spelling and history. And I remember when Elliot took his first Peabody test, and I think he must have been 5, and he didn't know something about a fairy tale. And I thought, so he got knocked down for not knowing something about a fairy tale, and we never read fairy tales to Elliot. So I felt like I really failed him as a parent there. But there's other tests that you can take, and I have a list of those too. There's the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, and it's abbreviated ITBS, which is a K-8 test. And you can buy these tests through the state of Minnesota, and I have those forms for you too. You just fill out a little web form, and I think it's like $10 or $15. They send you the test. It's a bubble test, and then you send it in to get the answer, the graded test back. Then there's the Iowa Test of Educational Development, which is the 9th through 12th grade. And then there's the Stanford Achievement Test, which is this SAT-10 test. That's also one of the tests that you can take. The state of Minnesota generally doesn't allow the SAT and the ACT and the PSAT test to fulfill the yearly academic testing. So while it seems like for your high schooler it would be great to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone, it's usually not approved. So when you fill out your letter of intent to homeschool, you're going to put what test you're going to take on that. And if there's a test provider, like we had Ann do ours, and then the school district is supposed to sign off on that. They really don't care. The schools don't really care which test you take. And I've never had a school not sign off on a particular thing for us. So it's a very easy thing to do. And then again, you don't report the results in Minnesota. You just have to have them. So somebody is saying that their student is going into 9th and might be a little bit behind in math and is in some special ed classes. You can still work at their level a little bit. I bet they're not as far behind as you probably think. Maybe if they just needed a different learning style than what the school was teaching, maybe they need a little bit more hands-on, maybe they need some more fun curriculum. You can look at different math programs like, well, Beast Academy is a math curriculum for younger kids under 5th and 6th grade. And then that turns into Art of Problem Solving, which I know a lot of you are familiar with. Alex.com, I think it is, ALEKS.com is another online math program, which we really liked, we used, and it's a pie. So you fill in the pieces of pie as you go, and the instruction was really good that we thought. It wasn't confusing. Ellie understood everything with it because he was far beyond my math. I couldn't do math past algebra. So he was able to learn everything he needed from Alex.com. There's ThinkWell, which is another math program that's online that some kids really like. I wasn't a fan of Khan Academy. Elliot did use Khan if he was stuck on something or needed further explanation by videos. So you can just Google what you want, Khan Academy, and the videos will come up, but I didn't use it for a full curriculum. I didn't like it as much. Somebody else says they like Alex. Yes, that's a great program. How do you know what qualifies for a high school course? That's something you can look at your state standards if you want to. Any higher level science, math classes, anything above algebra and up in math is going to be a high school level class. I know that some school districts around the states will say that algebra is 7th or 8th grade, but you can start giving it credit for high school too. Keep in mind, I know this is very Minnesota specific, and I know that some states are going to say that you have to do certain things in certain grades, but Minnesota is super easy to work with. So that's where I always rely back on what the colleges asked for. How do you homeschool science? And how do you deal with the need for lab equipment? So when Elliot was littler, we built something called a science kit out of a tackle box, and we put everything in there that any scientist would need for collection data, test tubes, microscope slides. And so we would, if we went to the park, we would bring this with us, and he would collect stuff and bring it home, look at it through the microscope, Googled videos of what he was watching and looking at. As he got older, then he ended up taking chemistry, and he did that through a local homeschool co-op. And even as an 8-year-old, they allowed him to take a high school chemistry class. So co-ops are going to be really flexible with age. They're going to be more ability-based, which is nice. And then we also got the Mel Science Kits, which you probably see behind me, which are monthly science kits that are, they send you in the beginning a box of chemicals and everything that you would need. And then every month they send you boxes of experiments that you do every month. And those come with videos too. So it's safe. I had to help light the lighter sometimes, that kind of stuff. And they learned a lot from that. So that was a good thing. Let's see. And then for lab equipment, we just bought a $100 microscope out of Amazon, but colleges too. Colleges sell their stuff that they don't use anymore, and you can get $300-400 microscope for $50. It's a good thing to do too. Did I school year round or follow the typical school schedule? We did year round because that's what Elliot wanted. So because you're good to go at your pace, you can do it all summer long, or you can stop if you want to. Does anybody else have any other questions? I don't know if I have a whole lot more to say. Somebody said that their son was interested in the Naval Academy, and any ideas on how online learning can support his dream. And I didn't know much about the Naval Academy, so I looked it up, but They allow homeschoolers, which is great. A lot of colleges are taking a whole lot more homeschoolers than they ever did before. There's no stigma attached to homeschoolers as much as there was, I think, at one time. They, like any other college that I thought, although I mean they're starting at 11th grade, is leadership, extracurricular activities, scouts, music, and volunteering. So they just kind of want to see a full portfolio of things that you're doing. You can start volunteering when they're really little, and it can be anything from the food shelf to going to volunteer at a nursing home. And then I know it's really hard to find opportunities when they're younger. Usually when they're under 13, it's a little bit more difficult. You can try volunteermatch.com or ask your Facebook friends too if there's any resources that they have for volunteering. I also wanted to mention that Minnesota has, part of their homeschooling laws allows your students to take extracurricular activities through the school district. So if they're still in soccer or any other sports, or they're in band, they can still be in those extracurricular activities by law through the school district. And then also Minnesota has something called shared time schooling. It's kind of like part-time homeschooling, part-time public school. The school does have to agree to it. Some schools might not agree to it, but basically if you want your kid to be in school for so many subjects and then you want to do math on your own, you can petition to have that done. In the state of Minnesota, you can review the curriculum, and if you don't agree to the curriculum, then you can have a decision made to do part-time schooling or shared time schooling, and then have those classes done somewhere else, whether it's homeschooling or at a co-op or anything like that. Did I have any certain subjects that I wanted Elliot to learn, or did he resist? How did I compromise or decide what was the minimum bar that you wanted him to have? I didn't really care, other than I always wanted him to make sure that he learned Swedish. So he's still not totally fluent in Swedish, but so since he was kind of motivated himself, I just let him do what he wanted. If you follow their lead a little bit, kind of unschooling, they enjoy school a whole lot more. So if they're into video gaming, you can build a curriculum based on gaming. They're going to learn to code. They're going to learn some math skills with that. They're going to learn some communication skills with people that they're talking to. You can learn about the history of video games. So then you can build that into an English and language arts kind of thing too. So if you're creative, you can make whatever they're interested in covering all the subjects. I think that's all the questions that everybody has, unless I missed something. Does anybody else have any questions? And feel free to turn on your microphone when you're talking, because I don't quite know how to do that for everybody.
You tell us more about the topics you're going to be covering next week and how we can get the information for dialing in for the next conversation.
Yeah, so I'll do another Zoom link, and I'll probably even make that today or tomorrow, since I know how to do it now. Next week, it's going to be a little bit more gifted specific. I was trying to break it up because I know that people were really curious about transferring from distance learning to homeschooling, especially in the state of Minnesota. So next week, it's going to be a whole lot more gifted, specific, radically accelerated, specific, how you get an 8-year-old in college. Not that you just decide you want your 8-year-old to go to college, but like why we made those steps and any kind of questions like that you might have. Erin, did you have a question too?
I do not.
Okay.
I think you kind of answered a lot of it. So
yeah. So yeah, you can be creative when you're homeschooling and working. You don't have to just sit at a table all day and homeschool. They can have flexibility. If you need extra resources, there's always a way to get that. If you're calling on mentors, if you're calling on tutors, there's online tutors. I don't quite know how it works with your district in distance learning, if you stay in distance learning, on how they work with your IEPs and that kind of stuff. I think
right.
Everybody is just trying to figure that out too. But you know, if you're a month in and it's not working, your school might say, give it more time, give it more time. This is very common when you're trying to get anything done with the schools. but don't, like, if it's not working, don't keep, you know, making a square peg go through a round hole, because it's not going to get better for anybody. And the school more than ever has no idea what they're doing or how to do it. So it might be a good time to take a break, de-school. I don't know if you've heard of that before. Just do nothing for a while. Let the kid kind of regroup, not worry about schooling for a while. If they're falling behind in math, then maybe work on a little bit of math here and there, and then just still let them kind of process everything. Depending on how long they've been in a public school, deschooling can take many months. Sometimes it's just a few weeks. You kind of judge what your child is going through. If you see that they need a little bit more structure, you can give that to them too. So yeah, you're not going to have the state of Minnesota coming after you and saying, why aren't you doing all these subjects every day? Because
That's what I worry about. Yeah, that's crazy. That's just so weird. It's so different.
Yeah. You know, another thing too is save your receipts. Probably like many other cities or states, Minnesota gives you tax credits and tax credits and refunds for your schooling supplies. And that can be anything from guitar lessons and piano lessons to any books that you buy, any field trips that you take, anything that you would need in your daily course of homeschooling. So in the PDF that I'm going to figure out how to send everybody, it has a list of those things. And so you get up to $2,000 of credit and subtractions every year. And do save your receipts, because I've gotten audited every year but one for my homeschooling expenses, but it's worth it. So yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Don't think so.
Okay. Feel free to email me too if you have any questions. I was super nervous and I don't know how to use Zoom very well. So I hope that I was able to answer some questions. Feel free to join me next week for the more gifted and accelerated chat. And we can go into more details about the process that Elliot took to get where he was, and how to finagle some of that red tape and age stereotypes and that kind of thing. So
thank you.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks everybody.
Thanks,
I will
everyone.
send out an email with the PDF with all the state specific worksheets and that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, Manuel.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.